Ian McEwan is here. His first collection of stories, First Loves, Last Rites, were published in 1975 when he was 24. His 1998 novel, Amsterdam, won the Booker Prize. It took a satirical look at the friendship of two middle-aged men. His 10th book, Atonement, is a World War II-era love story. It shows influences as far-ranging as Jane Austen and Ernest Hemingway. Michiko Katani of the New York Times, the book reviewer for that paper, called the novel a tour de force. I am pleased to have Ian McEwan back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you.
That's a country house if I've ever seen a country house, isn't it?
I think that's an Irish country house.
It really?
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah, but you have to take what you can get.
Did you start this idea with a visual image of a country house in your mind?
It began actually with a paragraph about a girl stepping into a drawing room of such a place.
Yeah.
She had some wildflowers in her hand, and I thought, who is she? When is this? I was just playing between novels, waiting to see what would pop up.
Now, what's interesting about that is when I read that, I remembered something you once had said before about the idea of the novelist is he takes the reader through a portal.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you're inside, and you can't quite get out, and you're there.
Yeah, I often think of the novel in architectural terms. I mean, you want its structure to be sound, but also those opening gates have got to be welcoming. I mean, how you get a reader to spend 10 or 12 or 14 hours with you, I think, is very important. And yes, I do like to feel there's ways of making sure your reader can't turn back.
Yeah.
You have to keep going forward.
You also worship at the grail of storytelling. Fair enough?
I like a story.
Well, maybe I'm putting too much on it, but it seems to me, whenever the narrative and storytelling, we should not forget.
I have the luxury of addressing my heroine through the persona of Cyril Connolly, who writes her a letter. She's just submitted him to his magazine Horizon in 1940, a novella. And it's rather sort of Virginia Woolfish, full of beautiful reflections on the way light hits stone and water. And Connolly says you've got to have, however good the writing is, you've got to have the backbone of a story. And so the novel in some way is a reflection on mid-century modernism and an older form of novel writing that you might find in Arnold Bennett. And how these things can impact upon our understanding of truth, how we lie in order to tell the truth in our storytelling.
How we lie in order to tell the truth in storytelling.
Bryony is witness to...
Bryony, tell us who Bryony is.
Okay,
I mean, she is the central character here.
She's a 13-year-old girl. She's obsessed with the idea of becoming a writer. She's rather priggish, conceited, self-important. She lives a very privileged life, and she has an ambition to become a great novelist.
At 13?
At 13, she feels that she can put behind her all the kind of fairy stories she's been writing. She is now set on the path to becoming a mature novelist, and she witnesses a number of events, a crucial one late at night. And she gets it all wrong. And one of the reasons she gets it all wrong is that she has such a powerful imagination that for her, believing is seeing. Her understanding, her wish for order too, causes her to completely misunderstand what she's seen and to send not only an innocent man to jail, but to wreck a love affair, which is what the central concern of the other part of this novel is. It's a love story that never quite makes it, like many love stories do.
When I interview a novelist, there's always a struggle as to what you tell and what you don't tell.
Yeah, I know. I've given up on that.
So you've got to help me. But okay, there's a set piece. That's the first set piece.
Yeah.
The next set piece is Dunkirk, right?
Then there's Dunkirk.
Then there's Dunkirk, in which
this young man who's been fingered by Bryony for a rape he never committed emerges from jail. He joins the army. He's in the infantry, and he is part of the huge debacle of Dunkirk when the German army swept across France, advancing at 60 kilometers a day towards the coast, sweeping through Belgium, coming through the Ardennes, with the one place where everybody said the army could never come, and most of the British soldiers who never fired a shot all swept towards the coast, and
The last boat out.
Robbie's sort of slogging away with two corporals, trying to reach the coast, and reflecting then, usefully for me as a novelist, on everything that has gone on in between. And really then that is a story within a story, really. And I had to find a different kind of language. The first part is written in a rather luxuriant prose. And it's funny how when you write on the battlefield, the subordinate clause is of no use.
Yeah.
It's the single details, boldly stated, that seem to be the most useful.
You did not set out to write a novel about war,
No.
or battles, or the observations of someone who sees and feels and experiences all that horror.
I knew, all through my writing life, I knew that one day I would try and do justice to my father's experience of Dunkirk. He was a dispatch rider. He rode a motorbike.
Right.
He got shot up in the legs. He teamed up with another fellow
whose arms were
were useless.
Yeah.
And between them, they managed the controls of their bike, and they got to the coast. Such a couple actually overtake Robbie on his slog through.
Stealing from life, are you?
Yeah, of course. And I knew one of these days I would get to this, and suddenly the structure of this novel opened a great gap, and there it was. And my great regret was that my father was not there to read it. He died in 1996. There he goes.
Yeah, but you had a chance to describe. Had you talked to him about that experience?
I taped him in 1989.
Knowing you'd want to use it, or?
I couldn't bring myself to listen to the tape. I've never listened to the tape.
Wow.
I can't quite. One of these days I will. I know his story so well anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything that I missed. But I still can't quite sit down to the reality. He was a Scotsman, very strong Scots accent.
Yeah.
So I stepped round that one.
And Bryony's now back in London.
Bryony now 20 years old. It's 5 years on from 1935 when this novel opens. And as she gets older, she begins to get the full measure of what she did that night. And part of the beginning of her atonement is to not take her place at Cambridge and follow her older sister Cecilia into nursing. Now Cecilia is her sister is the lover of Robbie,
right.
and it is their love affair that she has wrecked. And so the third part of this novel is about a young woman's experience of training to be a nurse. I had the good fortune of having the Imperial War Museum at my disposal, and a marvelous document library up in the dome of that, where you can actually get young girls writing home. Even one letter I saw even had blotches of what looked like tears, because these were, a lot of them very upper-class girls went into nursing. Real homebodies, never been away from home before. Nursing was a very militaristic sort of profession in its in the way it was structured. And suddenly these girls, coming from rather soft backgrounds, were in the most appalling sort of harsh and disciplinarian sort of cultures. And yet at the same time learnt unthinking obedience, which got them through the most appalling scenes when suddenly, as in Bryony's case, the hospital is filled with injured men coming from the front. She doesn't think, she doesn't pause, she just does what she's told.
You fall in love with your characters. Okay,
I
love is a
think
bad word, but maybe love. But Bryony, you are sort of, a lot of people who would criticize Bryony, you can't bear to do that, can you?
Well, I mean, the whole novel is a form of criticism of her,
Yeah,
but
of course it
it's
is,
true. I have to travel with her for 3 years, and she's my creation. She's my daughter, I suppose. Inevitably, yes, you do fall in love with these characters.
You say a wonderful thing about writing novels, which is that it comes at the best time is 2/3 of the way in, because you know where it's going by then. You've gotten to know these people, and they're coming to the crescendo of the rising and falling action and all of that.
It's true that writing a novel, well, a novel teaches you how to write it.
Yeah.
And the learning curve is long and slow. Beginnings are often very difficult. But somewhere past the halfway mark, maybe the two-thirds of the way through, you've learned it all. You know the characters, you know where you're heading, you still have the opportunity for surprises along the way, but you're finally in control. You've learned how to sing this particular song. And I think I'm not alone in this. I think lots of novelists feel this. Those days when they come 500 words, 800 words a day, it's a secret, it's yours, it's building in just the way you want. That is the real pleasure. And when people say, why do you write? I want to say then, how can you not? I mean, how could you not have this pleasure? How could you live without wanting to record, investigate life on these terms? Yet at the same time, I'm always craving to reach the end. I think, oh, if only I finish and my life will be free. And yet,
well, how do you know when you reach the end?
Well, I think I count the end as when you've made the last change to the galley proofs.
Yeah, okay, but that's a process.
Yeah.
That's not a creative act, is it? Or
well, no, you're still changing sentences,
yeah.
reading them aloud, thinking they don't quite sound, they don't beat right.
Yeah, and you do an interesting thing. You read aloud to your wife.
Yes.
You sit there on the end of the sofa with a glass of wine, a bottle of wine, a glass of wine.
It's not quite a bottle of wine each. It's a glass of wine.
But what? This is the first read. This is
first draft.
Yeah.
It all came about because she works in a very busy newspaper office, and she would come back with what we call tales of the filing cabinet. Guess what? The stab in the back. He's sacked. His copy was terrible. And what do I have to offer at the end of the day? Is how did it go? Well, fine. So, to make up for this, every month or two, when I've got another chapter of 3 or 5 or 7,000 words, we get into this sofa. It's a knoll sofa. It's got very high sides and back, and we can sit at either end facing each other. It's like a little sort of boat.
Now, what are you looking for? Does it what?
I'm not looking for approval. I don't need approval at this stage, or applause, or even useful comments. I think it's part of married life. I just want to tell her what I'm up to.
Yeah.
I can't give her any tales of the filing cabinet except sort of half a filing cabinet.
Yeah.
So I like her to know what I'm about generally, and when it's over, we don't talk about it.
No.
I've read it, and that's it.
Now, everybody says, you say this is your Jane Austen.
Well, I had in my notebook I write little messages to myself, and I always referred to this novel I was going to write about 12 years ago. I called it my Jane Austen novel.
Yeah.
It was a shorthand for
a gran.
Well, actually, no. Choosing a time, and I didn't know which it would be, when there's enough density of social texture to pitch a love story against. I thought that the historical novel would help me most here. I wanted to see if literary fiction could still do a love story. The love story has now become the preserve of Hollywood, of pulp fiction, and I think serious writers, unlike Tolstoy, unlike Flaubert, rather turn their backs on its possibilities.
Well, why is that?
Well, I think one of the reasons is a guy meets a girl at a disco. They could be lovers before they're even friends. You don't have those sort of social sanctions that make it so difficult to, to have a chaperone or exchange names. They can't speak because they haven't been introduced. Well, the 30s is not quite as bad as that, but there's still quite a lot of propriety. There are shoals to navigate. There are class distinctions that are really awkward. So when I say my Jane Austen novel, I just meant people hampered by rules which they have to cut through. That's all it was. I wasn't really aspiring to write the prose of the great Jane. If only I could.
What were you aspiring to?
I want to write a love story.
Right.
I wanted to find the perfect plot in which you could reflect on storytelling without it being an arid bit of self-reflective fiction. And so that was an ambition. You can't go looking for these things, but I found it in someone making a mistake, who happens to be a novelist, who then, all through her life, writes draft after draft of an atonement of trying to put it right. So there I could begin to talk about storytelling, and yet it would still have an emotional connection to a real event. It would have the backbone of a story, not just be an academic exercise in postmodernist, self-reflective fiction. It's only novelists who have this problem about whether there's a difference between art and life. I mean, no reader has this problem. It's only novelists who seem to want to remind themselves that stories are stories.
Now, had you find out from reviewers, I mean, a tour de force said Chico. I think it was The Economist or some other review I read said, a masterpiece. These are rather remarkable descriptions of a work of art.
Yes, well, I'm not going to go around stopping people.
No, you don't want to stop. My point is, do you also find with these people who are so gifted in their powers of analysis also tell you things about your novel you hadn't thought about?
No.
About connections, about meaning, about themes, about,
Sometimes people order their thoughts in ways in which I find that I can take something from it. Sometimes I even borrow. When I talk myself out, and I suddenly think, someone put this in a good way, and I might draw on that.
But Chico, go ahead.
I can't really say. The publishing world is a world like the film world, in which intensifiers need to be used. So I think masterpiece just means someone liked it a whole lot. One should not be too taken in by this.
This is what she said about you. This writing in the New York Times. She described this as a tour de force, as you know. Takes all the McEwan themes, this book, Atonement. Innocence, time part on time present, time past on time present. The intrusion of evil into ordinary lives, all delivered in a symphonic work. Does that ring true to you, those themes in your work?
It's all
innocence, time past on time present, intrusion of evil into our ordinary lives.
Well, you see, I don't think thematically at all.
You don't at all?
No.
That's what I'm getting at.
No, I don't. I think
themes
are not useful.
Resonate with you, or
I mean, they will be generated by what you do.
Yeah.
They're the sort of steam that rises off the forest canopy, if you like. The real business is the detail, and you start with a specific thing. It's only in the specific, and it's only. I mean, you have to live in the writing of a sentence. If you thought, well, I'm now going to write a novel about innocence and evil and time present and time past, you would be lost.
You would not,
or you would write the most pretentious novel you could possibly imagine.
Or you would never start.
No. Yes. I mean, you'd be overwhelmed. You have to start with something, like a character, like a detail as I did with a girl with some flowers.
Right.
Something that just snags on your interest, and you think, I don't know why I'm pulled down this way, but I will investigate this. Slowly the matter unfolds. I thought, now I seem to be at last writing my Jane Austen novel. In other words, there is social texture.
I didn't set out to do it, but by God I have.
Here it comes.
You know? 4 months in, it takes shape, and I realize I have a Jane Austen novel.
And I'm going to pursue this, and I can see already 3 or 4 months in that it's 1935. Well, that means I can take this character to Dunkirk. So I will also cover something I've always wanted to do. I think to myself, as I do with all novels, I am making a complete fresh beginning. This is unlike anything I've ever done. And I know perfectly well, too, that when it's done, a reviewer, a reader will have no difficulty assimilating it to everything else I've ever done.
Right.
You cannot escape yourself.
Right.
You are what you are. Your limitations are the limitations of your whole personality.
There's no one can talk about you without talking about some of the kinds of things you've written about before. You know, the whole macabre aspect of your life. You know, when you're writing things that people think, I mean, you described it in gruesome detail. Tell me what that was all about.
It came really, I mean, I was, as you said in your introduction, quite young. I was in my early 20s when I wrote First Love, Last Rites. Right. And I was very impatient with the state of English contemporary writing. I thought it was rather grey.
Right.
Nobody cared about sentences. It seemed to be mostly about people's divorces. It's set in sort of upper middle class households, of which I knew nothing, cared even less.
It had no drive, no passion, no energy, none of that.
And all the passion and energy at that time seemed to be coming from the United States. And about the time, the early 70s, I started reading. They seemed to be completely crazy and brilliant. Portnoy's Complaint.
Right.
The first Rabbit book of John Updike, Saul Bellows, Ventures of Augie March.
They had what?
Armies of the Night. They had ambition.
They had ambition, they had drive.
They had attention to the sentence, especially Updike and Bellows and Roth. They had a kind of controlled madness, and they also had a sort of pluralistic, democratic feel to them, which you wouldn't get in the English novel of the time. That is to say, Bellow could do the street, but he could also do what he would call, deep sea thinking.
Right.
This range really excited me, and in my own small, puny way, I thought, well, I want to do something crazed too. I'm going to have deranged narrators. I'm going to have dark material. I'm going to shock people. Well, then I went around denying for years afterwards when people said, "You write to shock, don't you?" And I said, "No, of course not."
No, you did.
Yeah. But of course I did actually want to shock. And I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't know how shockable people were.
In Between the Sheets, A Comfort of Strangers, A Child in Time, Innocent, Black Dogs, Daydreamer, Enduring Love. An evolution of books.
Yeah, I think that something happened.
Did I say that out of
no,
sequence?
Sounded great. But
something happened where?
Something happened at the end of The Comfort of Strangers. I felt it was such a dark little novel. And I thought, I've written myself into such a tight corner. Both the Cement Garden and The Comfort of Strangers were really the structure of short stories. And I thought, I've got to get a little more ambitious formally. I've got to get away from this claustrophobic and dark writing. So I wrote a television film with Richard Eyre called The Imitation Game, set in the Second World War, a girl in a code-breaking operation.
Right.
Then I wrote a political movie called The Ploughman's Lunch, a sort of State of the Nation movie with Jonathan Pryce, Richard Eyre directed. And I wrote an oratorio with Michael Barclay and with the London Symphony Orchestra. I got away from fiction for a while. Right. And by the time I came back, I felt I was much more prepared now to engage on a sort of a larger level.
But tell me this, were you doing that because were you doing that simply because that's the place you wanted to be, or were you doing that because you thought you needed to replenish yourself before you went on to the fiction you might want to write?
I think more the latter, although probably at the time it wasn't quite so programmatic.
Not quite so
these opportunities came up and I took them. I didn't say, no, I can't do that because I want to get on with my next very dark novel. I said, yes, I'd love to write a television film, and yes, let's make a movie, and yes, I'd like to find out how to write an oratorio. And it was a useful shift away, so that by the time I came back to the novel, I wanted it, the next novel I wrote, I wanted to have a richer and warmer human perspective, to be a little more specific in its sort of social context too. And so I began The Child in Time.
Right.
And I still wanted to write to the edge. I still wanted to think of the worst thing, in a way. I mean, a child snatched in a supermarket, probably as great a tragedy as could happen to parents. But I felt I was about to become a father myself, and by the time I'd written the novel, both children had been born. It took me 3 or 4 years, and they were both born in that time. And that was the change when I started the got to the end of The Comfort of Strangers and thought, no more. I can't do this anymore.
Do you think you're getting better? I mean, most people that I know think this is the best book you've written. Boom.
I don't know whether to be pleased or not. Maybe I should be pleased that people don't seem to find any consensus as to what my best book is. And I meet people who say The Innocent is by far your best book,
right.
and I mean other people who say that you'll never write a better book than The Child in Time or Enduring Love. That's fine by me.
And what does Ian say about the responsibility of the novelist to truth?
Well, it's very dodgy. You're not a memoirist, you know, you're not a historian, and yet, and you're not a biographer, and yet, in some respect, you're all of these things. You've got to find the emotional truth. And you've got, I mean, this is an investigation of human nature that we've devised for ourselves in this literary form. I think, personally, I tend to think it's the best way we have, because it's...
The novel.
It's so good at getting into other people's minds. It does tell us what it's like to be someone else, what it's like to be, to have their thought processes. It does that better than the movies, I think. You actually can get inside a head. You've got to do that with a kind of emotional truth. And it all comes down, I think, finally, to being true about the details. And Conrad said in a famous preface to The Nigger of the Narcissus, his only ambition was to make you see. If he could just make you see, then all the rest would fall into place. The morals, the themes. Just make the reader see, then everything else falls into place. And I think that's where the truth has to be. Everything else is secondary. It might even be more important, but it follows as a consequence rather than, as we said earlier, to think thematically at this stage is never useful at all.
Ian McEwan, Atonement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to see you.
Great talking to you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Thank you.